Welcome back. This is Putting Together the Pieces Program 1, a Training Heart Rate Calculator, Part 2. Part 1 dealt with designing the program. This part, Part 2, will cover the coding of the Training Heart Rate Calculator. We left off with Part 1 looking at a shell for the Training Heart Rate program. We see in the shell there is room to declare the program variables you identified from the problem description, a section for providing instructions to the user to explain how the program works, the input section that will request the user's name, age, and resting pulse, the process section that does the calculation using the formula for the training heart rate, and finally an output section for the recommended aerobic training heart rate. Now you can open up the shell and work along with me, or just watch and add your code later. I'm going to start with a program that's partly written. So given our training heart rate problem, the first section declares the program variables based on the notes we took and made during the design process. We have a training heart rate initialized to 0, made type double, with a comment that says this is calculated in output. The next three variables, age, resting pulse, and name, are captured as input, but these also have been given initial values: int age 25, int resting pulse 72, and string name buff guy. Now remember, string is not a primitive type in Java, and so because it's a class that we're using, we capitalize the S for string. Double, int are both primitive types, and we note that because they're keywords of the language and they're highlighted in blue. After putting the variables at the top of the program, we now give instructions to the user to explain how the program works. This is one giant System.out.println, and it goes from line 34 all the way down to line 36. Now when you need to put a long string out to the output stream, it's best to break it up in pieces. So we see here that this is spanning 3 lines of code, and it's been broken into 3 parts. Each part has to begin and end with a double quote. If you try to extend the code across multiple lines, Java will not allow it, and I'll demonstrate that right now. If I take out the quote and the plus quote, we see we get the red bubbles and a complaint from Java saying unclosed string literal. So let's put that back. The way we need to do this then is to break it into 3 separate strings and append those strings with the plus sign. Now if you have a particularly long string that you type and hit the enter key, NetBeans will do this automatically for you, which is a really nice feature. The output string is really too long to put on one line to the output as well. And so at the end of line 35, you'll see the escape sequence for a new line. Therefore, this output will be on 2 lines. The first line of output will say, this program calculates the recommended training heart rate for you when doing aerobic exercises. The \n advances to the next line. And then on the second line of instructions, we will print, you will need to enter your age and resting pulse. And then 2 more blank lines after it. This is to separate the instructions from the input part of the program for the user. Let's run this now and just take a look at the way those instructions lay out compared to the way we coded it. This is good review of the print line and the escape sequences. So here we see The first line of output says, "This program calculates the recommended training heart rate for you when doing aerobic exercises." You should be able to match that up to lines 34-35. Then the rest of the string starts on the next line. You will need to enter your age and resting pulse. Then we see the two \n's that produce two blank lines on the output. Let's look at the rest of this. Next is the input section that asks for the user's name, age, and resting pulse. Now we're leaving room here for capturing that input. That will be completed in the third video that introduces the scanner to this program. For now, we will see these prompts show up on the output. So if I scroll down a little bit on the output screen, we see, "What is your name?" "Hello, buff guy, what is your age?" And "Thank you. Now what is your resting pulse?" Those three lines correspond to the three System.out.println statements under the input section. Because we're using print, it will not advance to the next line. This is a good way to set up your prompts. When we do add the scanner, we will see that the user will be typing their name right next to the arrow that says, "What is your name?" Also note the use of extra spaces after the arrow to leave a little room for them to type their name without it being smacked up against the greater than sign. Now, because we're not accepting any input, the processing part of this program will use age 25, resting pulse 72, and the name buff guy. Let's look at the process part and the output. Here's the process part, where we calculate the user's training heart rate using the formula. Training heart is assigned the value of the expression 0.7 times the quantity 220 minus age plus 0.3 times the resting pulse. Let's drill down into this formula. Notice first that 220 minus age is in parentheses. This is necessary in this formula because we need to do that subtraction before the value is multiplied times 0.7. Without the parentheses, according to the precedence rules, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, the multiplication of 0.7 times 220 would occur, and then age would be subtracted from that, which is not what we want. So we want 220 minus the age. That result times 0.7. Therefore, it's inside the parentheses. The next thing to note are the stars for multiplication. The spacing here doesn't really matter. It's absolutely just there to make it easier for us to read. We could take out all the spaces and Java wouldn't care. It could figure it out. But it is a good idea to add some extra spaces. So I am going to put some spaces in here to make this easier to read. The third thing to note about this formula is that we have a 0 in front of the 0.7 and a 0 in front of the 0.3. For values less than 1, many programming languages require that you put a 0 before the decimal point. Java might not mind, but other languages probably would. So it's good to just go ahead and leave them in there. Finally, we see the System.out.println for output. Output the name, append to that the string your recommended aerobic training heart rate is, and then the training heart rate variable. Down below we see the output. Buff guy, your recommended aerobic training heart rate is 158.1. The next video will complete the code by accepting inputs from the user to make this a truly usable calculator for training heart rates. Right now, it's only good for calculating Buff's training heart rate. And once we run that, It seems a little silly to keep running it again and again.